All right, so let's dive into this Klute movie, a 1971 neo-noir, huh? You sent us a pretty in-depth review. It seems like you want to like really dissect it, go beyond the plot, figure out why people think it's such a classic. Especially, if you're into character studies and all that psychological suspense stuff.
Yeah, this review, it really digs deep. Calls Klute a masterclass in psychological suspense. So I'm giving it if you are. Let's break it down.
Okay, so like the basic setup, we've got this missing businessman, right? Tom Grunman. And he's been sending these, well, let's just say interesting letters to a call girl in New York City. Her name's Bree Daniels.
Setting the stage. Classic noir, the underbelly of the city.
And then there's John Klute, the detective. He gets pulled into this whole thing, this world that's, well, it's way creepier than your average missing person case. But the review keeps saying, like, the plot, that's just the start.
Exactly. It's about the characters, the atmosphere, the mood, how it all makes you feel. It gets under your skin, It's not just a puzzle to solve.
Right, right. And speaking of characters, we got to talk about Bree Daniels. Jane Fonda, amazing. She won an Oscar for this. No surprise. The review is just like all about her performance, how she's intelligent, but also like really vulnerable. It says she's not just some simple femme fatale. There's a lot more to her.
Oh, totally. It actually talks about how she kind of flips that whole femme fatale thing on its head. She uses her sexuality as a defense, but she's also longing for real connection, to be in control of her life. It's something that resonates with women. Even today.
That's so true. And the film shows us like the dark side of her world, how she's being used, exploited. But the review is clear. She's not just a victim. She makes choices. Some of them are kind of morally iffy, but she's always trying to be in control, to have some self-respect.
Absolutely. Complex character, flawed, which is what makes her feel so real. Okay, but let's shift gears for a sec. How does the film visually, build that sense of unease? The review goes on and on about the cinematography, Gordon Willis, deep shadows, claustrophobic, classic neo-noir,
Yeah.
all highlighting her isolation.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like you feel trapped with her, like you're always looking over your shoulder. The review makes a big deal about how well they do that. It's not just like stylish. It really messes with you. You feel her paranoia.
And it's not just what you see, it's what you hear. Eerie score, that silence, it hangs there like something's about to happen, but you don't know what or when. No cheap jump scares in this movie. It's about slowly, deliberately building that psychological tension.
Oh, man. When I first saw Klute, that scene where she's alone in her apartment, right, and there's this noise outside her door, I was like totally freaked out. Like that's when I realized how powerful sound can be in a thriller.
Yeah, it gets to you. It's like the film itself is another character pulling you in. But back to the characters for a sec. The review seemed to really like Donald Sutherland as Klute.
Yes, definitely. He's crucial. Even though he's like more understated than Fonda, he's stoic, methodical, totally different from her. But as the story goes on, you see Klute, he starts to care about Bree. That humanity kind of peeks through. It's fascinating to watch them together.
Yeah, they're dynamic. And that's what elevates it, I think. Beyond just a normal thriller. It's not just a case to solve. It's about these two people, both struggling with, like, who's in control, how vulnerable they feel, and how they connect.
Right, and that takes us back to the whole idea of psychological suspense. The review really gets into how Klute messes with what you think is going to happen. You don't know who to trust, what's real, what's just Bree freaking out.
It keeps you guessing. Doesn't give you all the answers. The tension just simmers. You have to come to your own conclusions.
Yeah.
Which can be even more unsettling, to be honest. It's like the villain isn't just some person, but like the anxiety itself,
Yeah.
what they're most afraid of.
Okay, but before we like really analyze the bad guy and all that suspense, you said the review calls Klute a masterclass. Do you like actually think it lives up to that?
That's a good question. I think it does, yeah. And one of the ways it does that is by tapping into those bigger fears. The fear of being watched, controlled, which was a big thing in the 70s, but it's like even more relevant now. Right?
Yeah. Like that feeling you get sometimes online, like someone's watching you, those algorithms are like manipulating everything. That creepiness Klute captured, it was just as strong back then, just in a different way. It makes you wonder, like, how much control do we really have?
Exactly. And that's why Klute is so powerful, even now. It speaks to those fears about privacy, power, that feeling that someone or something is pulling the strings. But we'll get more into all that in the next part.
Sounds good. So just to recap this first part, we've got these complex characters, Bree especially, amazing visuals that really pull you into her world, sound design that just cranks up the tension. And we talked about how the film keeps you guessing and how it gets at those timeless anxieties we all have about being watched and controlled.
Yeah, and that's just the beginning. There's so much more to unpack, include.
Yeah.
From like how it portrays gender roles and power to how it influenced all the thrillers that came after it. But let's take a break here. Let all that sink in before we move on. Welcome back.
So, as we kind of dig deeper into all this whole surveillance and control thing, it's pretty wild how relevant Klute still feels. Like it really captures that feeling, that someone or something is always watching.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it makes you think, like, how have those anxieties changed? Back then it was more, I don't know, concrete wiretaps hitting cameras. But now it's everywhere. Digital, phones, computers, our smart fridges are probably spying on us, right? So the line between like reality and just being paranoid, it's all blurred now.
It really has. In this review, it points out how Klute gets at that like primal fear of the unknown, not being in control. And that's even stronger today, right? Social media, we're putting ourselves out there like this perfect version of us. But underneath, it's all vulnerable. All that data being, I don't know, mined, analyzed. It's creepy. It's like we're the ones being watched, but we're also watching everyone else, Judging, comparing. It's like we're all stuck in these like digital echo chambers.
It's weird, right? A paradox. And it ties back to the whole power thing we were talking about. Bree, in the film, she's struggling with control, not just because she's being stalked, but because of what she does, how society sees her.
This whole power thing, it reminds me of this time. This was so freaky, my smart speaker. It was recording a conversation, like a private one. I totally freaked out and started thinking, like, how much of these things listening to?
That's a great example.
Mm-hmm.
And think about how tech makes those power dynamics even worse. Algorithms, they decide what we see online. Information is filtered, manipulated. Fake news spreads like crazy. It's overwhelming, right? Like we're constantly bombarded with messages and it's all trying to, I don't know, influence us.
It's exhausting. And it's easy to just feel powerless, right?
Right.
But that's why these stories, like Klute, they're important, I think. They remind us that even when things are messed up, we can still fight back, have some control.
I'm with you on that. And it's not always like big heroic stuff. It's the little choices, the boundaries we set, how we interact with everything around us.
Like Bree does, right? She's messed up, makes mistakes, but she's strong. She doesn't let her circumstances define her.
Exactly. That's powerful no matter when you hear it. But let's go back to the film itself. We've talked themes, acting, the visuals. What really stood out to you in this review? What grabbed you?
One thing that stuck with me was how they talked about the ending. They said it was understated but effective. I gotta say, I thought it was kind of ambiguous. Do you think it gives you enough closure? Or are there too many loose ends?
Ooh, good point. It definitely leaves things open, but maybe that's why it works. It doesn't tie everything up neatly. You're left with this feeling of like unease, like the danger isn't really gone.
Which is scarier in a way, right? Than if everything was resolved. You're left wondering what happens to them, Bree and Klute, after the movie ends. Will they ever be free from all this?
Exactly. And that ambiguity, it speaks to the whole message,
Yeah.
About how surveillance, control, it's always there, lurking.
That's kind of creepy. But changing gears a bit, the review also said the villain, they said he was kind of underdeveloped. I kind of agree, but then I thought maybe that's the point.
Interesting.
Tell me more.
Well, the real threat in Klute,
Mm-hmm.
it's not really one person. It's that feeling, the unease, like something bad's going to happen. It's like the villain represents that, all the anxieties, what they're most afraid of.
Whoa. That's a good point. Like, he's this invisible force, the feeling of being watched, just like today with all the data collection and all that.
Exactly. And that goes back to what the movie's about, right? Surveillance, that feeling of being watched, judged, manipulated. That's huge today, politically, socially. It's everywhere.
Totally. Makes you think, like, how do we deal with a world where privacy's disappearing, where everything we do is tracked? Klute makes us think about that, even though it's like, 50 years old? It's crazy, right? Okay, but the review mentioned something else. I wanted to dig into this more. The whole, how it portrays gender roles, the power dynamics. It was made in 1971, so, Bree, as a call girl, the review acknowledges that she's in this world where she's exploited.
Yeah, important to talk about that. Viewers today, they might find that tough, uncomfortable even. But you got to remember, it's a product of its time. Reflects how things were back then.
Right, I get that. But I also felt, I don't know, frustrated by some of her choices. Does the film, like, romanticize her struggle?
It's a good question. Up for interpretation, I think. Some people might see her as a victim. Others might see her as someone fighting to be in control in a system that's holding her back.
It's definitely complicated. I like that the film doesn't give easy answers. It's a conversation we should be having, especially now, since these same things are still happening, just differently.
I agree. And the ambiguity, it makes the movie stronger, makes us face these truths about power, how women are treated, even by men who, think they're being good guys.
So even though it's old, Klute still has something to say to us today. But before we finish up this part, I want to just circle back. You mentioned those technical things, cinematography, the sound, how it really gets to you.
Oh, yeah, that's essential, right? To that psychological suspense we keep talking about.
Right. Can you, break that down more? How does it use those techniques to make you feel so uneasy, that paranoia?
Well, think about the shadows, the light. Lots of dark scenes, characters are hidden, you can't see them clearly. It's mysterious, but it also makes you nervous, like something's hidden,
And then there's, how the camera frames things. Often it's close on Bree's face, isolating her. You feel how vulnerable she is. It's like we're stuck in her head, feeling everything she feels.
You got it. And the sound, so good. The silence, the music, then sudden noises, it all builds that tension. It's like a game. The movie's playing with us, keeping us on edge, waiting for the next thing to happen.
And the way it blurs what's real and what's just her paranoia, you never really know, is this actually happening or is she just imagining it?
Right, and that's what makes it so unsettling. It makes you question what you're seeing, what's real.
Okay, so we've talked themes, technique, how the film messes with us. What do you think, what's its legacy? How did it change thrillers?
Well, for one, it changed Neo-Noir. It took those classic things, the darkness, the femme fatale, the cynical detective, and made them modern. Added psychology, social commentary.
And it opened the door for so many other thrillers that explored the same stuff. Paranoia, being watched, the dark side of people.
Exactly. Movies like The Conversation, Rear Window, even newer ones like Enemy, Nightcrawler, they all owe something to Klute. It showed that thrillers could be more than just, genre stuff. They could be art, make you think about society, and really explore the messed up parts of human nature.
And it's amazing people still connect with it, even though it's old. But before we wrap this part up, I wanted to go back to John Klute, the character.
Sure, what about him?
Well, we talked a lot about Bree, her struggles, but Klute's interesting too. The review calls him stoic, methodical, but like I said, you see his human side too, especially with Bree.
Yep. He's not just some tough guy detective.
Mm-hmm.
He's got depth, vulnerability. You see it more as the movie goes on.
And their relationship, what do you make of that? It's complex, right? There's attraction, respect. He wants to protect her.
Their relationship is one of the best parts of the film. Hard to define. Partners, but also they clash. Personalities, how they see the world.
And how does it reflect the bigger themes? Power, control. At first, Klute has the power. He's the detective. But then as he gets closer to her, that shifts.
Great observation. Adds another layer to it. We see Klute struggling with what he thinks he knows, his biases, and he ends up respecting her strength, how she keeps going.
But it also brings up these questions about how men and women are supposed to act. Klute, even though he respects her, he's still part of that system that holds her back.
Totally. And the film knows that. Even if it doesn't give us clear answers, it makes us think critically, challenge what we believe, how power messes with our relationships, our lives.
We've covered a lot in this part. Surveillance, control, gender roles. We talked about how they use the filmmaking to create that suspense and how the movie influenced other thrillers.
Yeah, it's been great. And we've just scratched the surface. There's so much to Klute. But before we move on to our final thoughts, I want to leave you with something to think about. How do you think the movie would be received if it came out today?
That's a good one. I think it would still connect with people, but maybe differently. Those themes, surveillance, control, they're even bigger now than in the 70s.
And how they portray gender roles, that would definitely spark some debate. But the core message, I think, about trying to have control in a world that feels so chaotic, that would still be powerful.
I think so too. But for now, let's take a minute, gather our thoughts, then we'll dive into our final analysis. All right, we're back for the last part of our Klute deep dive. We've talked about a lot, the characters, how creepy it is, the way it looks and sounds, that psychological suspense. But before we wrap up, there's one more thing. How it, portrays men and women, those power dynamics.
Yeah, that's a big one, especially since, it was made back in 71. The review, it's upfront about that. Bree Daniels being a call girl, that world, it uses her, objectifies her. And that's, I think, part of why people are still talking about this film today. Gender, power, all that. It's more relevant now than ever.
Totally. In the film, it shows us that dark side of her life. She's always hitting up against those limits, what society says she can do, the men who, see her as just a thing. But she's not a stereotype. That's what makes her so interesting. She's a real person trying to figure things out in a world that, doesn't want her to succeed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Smart, tough, and she wants to, have self-respect.
Yeah.
She makes choices. Sometimes they're not, the best choices, but she's never just sitting there taking it. And with Klute, that's when we see her starting to take control.
Yeah, the review mentioned that, how Klute, he respects her, treats her like an equal, but he's also, part of that same system. It makes their relationship so, so messy. The film doesn't give you any easy answers.
And that's what I like about it. It makes us think about those hard truths about power, how women are treated, even by guys who maybe think they're doing the right thing. It's still happening today. And the fact that the movie doesn't spell it out for you, that makes it even more powerful. It stays with you.
Absolutely. And it's not just them, Bree and Klute, the whole film. It's reflecting what people were anxious about back in the 70s, but it also feels so, so familiar to now.
True. The whole surveillance thing, controlled, trying to be your own person, that's huge now. We live so much of our lives online, all that data, those algorithms, they're deciding what we see, what we think. It's like Klute knew this was going to happen.
It's crazy, right? Made over 50 years ago, and it's talking about us now. So wrapping up, what's the one thing you want our listener to remember? What's Klute all about?
Klute, it's a film that gets in your head. Yeah, it's a great thriller, but it's about the characters, what society was afraid of, how people can be strong. It makes you look deeper, face things that are hard to think about, and keep asking questions about the world.
Well said. And if you want a film that'll really make you think, stay with you after it's over, then watch Klute. Even when things are bad, when it feels like you're trapped, there's always hope. Hope for connection, for being your own person, for finding your way out of the darkness.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed it.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep thinking, and keep diving deep.